Shabbat Shalom and Moadim L'Simcha. I'm not alone in here, right? Thank you. I'll take a Shabbat Shalom. The rest is nice, too. So maybe you're still all stunned and staggered from our earlier selection that we read from the book of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes. Strange stuff in there, isn't it? The book of Ecclesiastes. It is not an easy read by any stretch of the imagination. It is not for the faint of heart, and it is not for those who are not prepared to think. This is why the book of Ecclesiastes, of Kohelet, almost didn't make the cut when it came time to canonize the Tanakh, to pull together all of the books into the Bible itself. At least that's the discussion that happens in the Mishnah. If you were part of my Mishnah class, you would know this because we just studied it a few weeks ago. Or if you read through the section of the Talmud on the same passages. The rabbis argue that Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, was considered so suspect because it seemed to contradict everything else in the entire Torah that maybe it wasn't worthy of being included. And if you don't realize that there were other books that didn't make the cut. If you go back to the Apocrypha, the Pseudepigrapha that other people have collected in their traditions, and even some that were referenced within Judaism, like Ben Sira's wisdom, they were not considered to be divine. They were not considered to be inspired. They were not considered to be canonical or Sifrei Kodesh, holy books. They are interesting books. The most famous that we do still make a reference to on something like a regular basis, of course, are the Book of Maccabees. Those are not considered to be holy scripture, but Kohelet is. And if you've ever read the book of Maccabees, you'll be scratching your head too. Because the book of Maccabees is straightforward, it is clear, it is a message that we can all relate to. The story of Hanukkah, of course, this is a wonderful thing. But Kohelet just seems backwards. It just seems upside down. It seems inside out. Kohelet tells us better the day of death than the day of birth. Better to go to a house of mourning than a house of partying. It's totally contradictory and counterintuitive, which is the point. Kohelet is part of the wisdom tradition within Jewish writing. Pursuit of chokhmah, of wisdom, is not easy. And as a matter of fact, wisdom is usually counterintuitive. How can that be? Well, because if it weren't counterintuitive, you would have already thought of it, and you wouldn't need to be taught it. That which our intuition tells us, we don't need someone else to explain. That which our intuition tells us which is wrong, we do need someone else to explain that it is wrong. Quick examples of a few things where we usually get them wrong in intuition. What is the closest state in America to Africa? Maine. It's the easternmost state, and with the curvature of the earth, it is the closest point. Our intuition tells us Maine is way up in the north, Africa is way down in the south. Of course, they're not going to be the closest. Maybe Florida, maybe the Carolinas as they lean in, but, no. Maine is closest. A cloud. Clouds, fluffy things up in the sky, they can weigh 1 million pounds. They don't look heavy. They certainly are, because they're big, but they don't look so big from the ground, do they? Our intuition tells us clouds must be light, or else they wouldn't float. And while each individual droplet is light, the cumulative effect that creates what we call a cloud is pretty darn heavy. You have a traffic problem in your neighborhood. The solution is, of course, to add more lanes to the road, right? No, absolutely not. I know that is the intuitive solution, and we all love to see road widening programs because we think, finally we're going to get the more lanes to have more capacity. More capacity means more cars will be able to drive on it more quickly. And the first half of that sentence is correct. More cars will come and drive on wider roads, but the increase will actually create continued or perhaps even increased congestion. Time and time again, we'll see that people will widen roads only to find out that you actually get more traffic, because it turns out that the average individual says, wait, that road looks wider and faster, I'll use it now. And they stop using alternative routes that they had been using before the wide roadening scheme. the road widening scheme, excuse me. And thus, you add more people into the mix, you get more congestion, the travel time slows down. In some places around the world, in both the States as well as many other parts of Europe and Asia, they have taken out lanes and increased the traffic flow and travel times, or decreased travel times. Counterintuitive, right? This is one reason why we do studies. This is one reason why we have science and research and data and statistical analysis, because our intuition is often flawed. And so too, says Kohelet, is our intuition often flawed. And the book of Kohelet is excellent at running through a test of life. Not just saying, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. The author of Kohelet, purported to be King Solomon, actually tries out different ways of living. It is a remarkable diary of somebody who wants to know if he can find the best way to live. And he tries living a purely hedonistic lifestyle, because we would imagine that a purely hedonistic lifestyle would bring satisfaction, right? If I am eating everything I want, if I am drinking everything I want, if I am partying in every other way you can conceive of with whomever I want, you know, as Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king, then surely I'm going to be happier than if I didn't do those things. It's obvious, it's intuitive. It's something that we continue to try and portray in our media and all of our social media posts, that somehow this consumer materialistic lifestyle, this hedonism par excellence, is the secret to happiness. And of course, for Kohelet, just like everyone else who tries it in real life, it's a crash and burn. It is an absolute failure. He discovers he's no happier doing that than he was not doing that. And he tries the opposite. He tries a more aesthetic form of life, of restraining and refraining himself from having access to all of these pleasures. And guess what? That also doesn't unlock the secret of happiness. He tries acting with the greatest wisdom of study and insight. And it turns out, as we read a bit from our passage, being smart and wise doesn't necessarily make your life easier and more comfortable. You don't become more successful in business necessarily. You certainly don't become happier in all of your other relationships in life. And as a matter of fact, it often feels like there are catastrophes and calamities that are going to blindside you regardless of how much you have studied up on it. And you may think you are the ultimate prepper, ready for any possible thing life could throw at you. You've got your 6-month savings account already set aside. You've got your 3 months worth of food stashed in the basement. You've got your first aid, second aid kit all put away in multiple places. You've got ammo to last the zombie apocalypse. And the earthquake comes and buries it all. And you are homeless and walking down the streets with everyone else looking for a place to spend the night before the next aftershock. What do you do? Says Kohelet. Well, Kohelet basically finalizes, you stop trying to imagine that your life is going to be better purely because of the material things that you have surrounded yourself with, either because of the things you have added or the things you have tried to take away. Plus, you should not imagine that your material life is going to materially benefit because of the intellectual pursuits that you engage in. That isn't to say that they are worthless, but if you think, if only I get this level of understanding, this level of wisdom, and wisdom was considered a commodity back then, just as it is considered a commodity now to be attained through various degree programs or certifications, if you think that extra wisdom is going to unlock the secret of happiness, then you are also mistaken, because you are still pursuing a secret of happiness that is primarily and fundamentally materialistic, and the materialistic world is fragile, and it will break your heart if that's what you have set your sight upon. Instead, you have to detach yourself from this. Not become an ascetic monk living in a cave somewhere in the Himalayas, but you have to detach yourself from the goal that the materialism is the point. You have to instead recognize that materialism can certainly make life more easy. Absolutely, as Kohelet says, eat, drink, and be merry. That's okay. Nothing wrong with having a happy material life. Just don't think that the happiness is because of the material life. It is parallel, it goes along with it, but it is not the cause of it. And if those things were taken away and you could no longer be happy, then you have failed to understand what life is about. Because life is about that internal life, that internal growth, that internal spiritual path that each one of us is on. The conditions in which we travel, yes, we can make as comfortable as possible, but don't mistake the comfort of your carriage on the train for the destination that you are heading towards and for the true joy of the journey that you are undertaking. Make it comfortable. Get the air conditioning. We all realized that after the power outages of Hurricane Ian. Make sure you have running safe water. Make sure that your bed is comfortable. Make sure that you are able to celebrate and do joyous things. Don't be an idiot, because it is, on the whole, better not to be stupid than to be stupid. But don't think that any of those things are the ultimate determinant of your joy. There's a reason why we read Kohelet at the time of Sukkot. And there's a reason why we do much of Sukkot as we celebrate Sukkot. Sukkot was, for lack of a better phrase, the lottery winning day for most of our ancestors for much of our history. If you are a farmer, right now you are sitting on the largest pile of winnings that you can ever imagine, because you have finished harvesting your field, and unless it was a terrible, terrible day, terrible year, you have more food now than you are going to have for another year. And that is the kind of thing that makes a person feel a little self-satisfied and secure and, dare I say, arrogant. And if you think that is what's going to make you happy, well, I've got a booth out back that tells you no. Because we don't live in the sukkah because it is harvest time. We live in the sukkah because it is no longer harvest time. We live in the sukkah to remind ourselves that it is not about what we have gathered that is important. It is about what we can fit into that hut that is important. And what we can fit into that hut is us, our family, and our spirit. And that's it. Everything else in it is inconsequential. It is trivial. It is ephemeral, and it is unreliable as a source of happiness or meaning in life. We shake a lulav, half of which the species are useless to us, to remind ourselves that it's not about shaking a bundle of cash. It's not about shaking gold or silver or jewels. We are shaking things that, yes, some of them are pleasing to us, but most of them are fairly insignificant. To remind ourselves it is not about how they serve us. It is about being able to appreciate the glory and the beauty of life and the world in all of its forms, of letting go of that scraping and climbing for more of what I want, and recognizing what already is as being beautiful and splendid. Sukkot is an incredibly complicated and counterintuitive holiday, and it is perfectly complemented with the reading of Kohelet of the Ecclesiastes. If you haven't read it any time recently, please follow our custom and tradition of reading through Kohelet. We've got until tomorrow before we are finished with the holiday of Sukkot. Reflect on what it is that actually is important to you. Reflect what it is that actually makes your life feel meaningful. Reflect on each thing that might be taken and whether or not your life would still be okay as long as you had what was essential to you. If you're confused about those points, if you feel alarmed or threatened at the loss of some of the superficial material things, sit a little bit longer in the sukkah. Learn to be happy even there, and you will find yourself more at peace everywhere else as well. Shabbat shalom and moadim l'simcha.